I've delved a little bit into the Roman pantheon and deities and how they worship, and it's fascinating. I'd not heard of Lupa before, so I did. It was a wonderful book that introduced me to information that I didn't know. I'm going to start with the term queenship, because that term struck me as an interesting one, and you mention it in the book. Can you explain what you mean by the phrase, term, word, queenship?
Yeah, of course. So this actually harks back to university again, and I kind of mentioned this in the preface of my book. I've always been fascinated by queens. I kind of want to be a queen. Like it's my my dream role. Like, you know, I would. If I was an author, I'd be a queen. But yeah,
obviously.
So I know, not just for the crown. But it's always fascinated me. Like, you know, women kind of having the opportunity to be in power, and to be empowered and to make choice. That's always fascinated me. In my university degree, my undergraduate, I did my dissertation on medieval queenship. So what did queenship kind of mean? Like, what did society thought it meant? What were the expectations of those queens? And then how were they actually queen? Like, what did it mean for them? You know, what did that encompass? But also, how did it affect them emotionally, physically, and in their lives and their choices? And the reason it fascinated me was because all of the queens, as I was going through, you kind of had like good queens and bad queens, you know, as we do the good and bad thing. And there were several queens that were called she-wolves, like the she-wolves of England. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. Like, why are they being labelled she-wolves? And I was finding that all the ones that were labelled she-wolves were the most interesting queens. Like, they were the ones that were really stirring things up. And then they were labelled she-wolves because they had not done what they were told. They were seeking some kind of way to create their own lives, you know, a way to have a voice, you know, and they were making their own choices, which wasn't kind of vibing with, you know, the kings or the men that were in power at the time. They were all getting a bit miffed that she was trying to do her own thing, and they're like, oh, she's a she-wolf. You know, she was seen as a predator, so something that was dangerous and dark, you know, because at that time in, you know, medieval England, the wolves were something that was to be feared. You know, it was only in the dark woods, because by that point they'd been pushed into the forest, so they weren't seen. They were just known of occasionally when they would, you know, pinch a sheep and go off for lunch.
So it was an insult, really. And
it was an insult. Yeah. And that term's always fascinated me. So when it's come up, I've been like, there's something here that I need to be observing, that I need to be witnessing whenever a woman is given the term she-wolf. And I remember reading, like, I don't even know why I was reading it. I think I was researching something about the wolf moon, I think, many, many years ago now. And I don't even know how it happened, but somehow Lupa came forth, just like she was meant to, like magically. And they just called her the she-wolf. Like, and I started like, okay, there's a she-wolf here. So first of all, I'm being highlighted that there's a she-wolf, so I have to look at her. And then I started reading about the foundation stories of Rome, which is where her story is. You know, and these stories were like, you know, Mars did this, and this king did this, and this man did this, and then this other man did this. And then suddenly there's this she-wolf that just happens to appear and just randomly turns up, just happens to save Romulus and Remus, just happens to not eat them, then just happens to just take them off to her cave and look after them, rather than again turning them into lunch. And it was so obvious to me that this was an epiphany of the goddess. Like, I was like, this is divine intervention. Like, and you know, and from then on, it was like, you know, okay, this feminine aspects had an involvement. She is the pivot. She is the catalyst. Without it, Romulus and Remus would not exist. They would be dead. Like, she is the reason that Rome exists as it is. She is like the most important part of that story. And yet from then on, it was like the she-wolf just picked up the babies. And I was like, oh, this is another scenario where the divine feminine and her intervention has been played down, in the last like 2,000 years. It's been kind of made smaller and smaller and smaller. It kind of links very much into, queenship in that reclaiming of our power, in that she had this huge impact, and we can have huge impact as women, as queens in our lives, deciding how we rule our life, and deciding on the impact that our voice can have and our actions can have. And that's how it kind of links in this way that I think that Lupa can remind us how to reclaim our own queenship,
Right. I mean, I'd heard of, and most people must have heard of Romulus Remus if you are familiar with the creation story of Rome. But I hadn't heard of her at all. She has been sort of sidelined, really, hasn't she?
Yeah. And I think that, there was definitely a very deep and loud howl that came forth. Like, from that point, I knew I just had to speak on her behalf. So here I am, and here's the book.